Start the webinar. So this is just let attendees. Hello everyone. I can see that people are joining now. Okay, more and more people joining now. Time to load my presentation. Okay, I'm just going to give everyone a few seconds to come in and find a seat, a virtual seat. I can see a few familiar names there. So welcome everyone. Okay. Let's start our seminar. So hello everyone and welcome to the Startup Seminars 2022, a series of events brought to you by City Ventures. I'm your host Rui, and we are the team that have put together a series of events last term, and we are back this term with new events, new competitions and new programs for you if you're studying at City University. But some of you might be asking, what is City Ventures really? We are the driving force of entrepreneurship at City University of London. We are a very small team and we support students and graduate entrepreneurs. We're right at the heart of London's tech city, and we give you the tools, the tips, the tricks to help your business get off the ground. And you can also join some of our co-working spaces and meet other city entrepreneurs like yourselves. So this week we are kicking off, or we're launching the 2022 Startup Seminar Series. Thank you so much for joining us today. We want you to come and learn every Wednesday afternoon from legends, from entrepreneurs themselves. So to register and to find out more, if you have your phone with you, just point to the QR code and that will take you to the page where you can find more information. So tonight, not tonight, but this afternoon, we will have Rob Wilson, Chief Toaster at Toastel. I'll urge you all to use the Q&A button to ask questions as the presentation goes along. Take notes, participate, engage, because this is the way, always the best way to learn. Next week, we'll see us welcoming Dhruvin Patel. Dhruvin is the founder of Ocushield. He did optometry, the course at City University, and he will be telling us more about connecting with potential customers. So be sure not to miss this seminar next week. In March, we'll see City Spark workshops returning. And if you're looking to start and develop your business idea, we'll be offering you City Spark workshops where you can get your startup a workout. So again, use the QR code in the corner and to find out more and to register for these sessions. Be mindful that the spaces are limited, so be quick to register. So in April, we'll have City Spark Grand Final. So this is City's biggest competition. So we will have 25K prize pot with 5 awards to be distributed amongst the top City University entrepreneurs. So if you study at City or if you're a recent graduate, again, point to the QR code and be sure to find out more and apply for this amazing competition. Just to wrap everything up, we offer not 24/7, but we offer on a weekly basis business advice. So you can book an advice session with myself or a member of the team, and we will help you bring your idea to life. So if you are a student at City or recent graduate, again, point to the QR code to sign up for the sessions. If you want to find out more, or if you want to find this information, please make sure that you visit cityventures.co.uk or email us at cityventures@city.ac.uk, and we'll get back to you should you have any more questions. Now, it's the time that we put our hands together and we welcome Rob Wilson, Chief Toaster at Toastel, to the stage. Hello, Rob. Are you there?
Hello.
Hello, Rob. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Rory.
Very nice to see you and to welcome you on stage again. Rob is a big friend of City. He has been on several occasions talking to our students. Rob and Toastel brings us a fantastic story to share with you, and a very simple product. But I'm going to let Rob tell you more about that soon. But Rob, if you don't mind, I'm just going to introduce you as the Chief Toaster at Toastel. That's actually your title. More of that in a second. Toastel is a social enterprise turning bread into beer. So Rob has been involved with Tostel since its inception in early 2016, and he was initially an advisor, and more recently he became a full-time chief toaster. Tostel believes that if you want to change the world, you have to throw a better party than those destroying it. So prior to Toasts, Rob led an organization in the UK supporting a global network of social entrepreneurs to scale systems, changing ideas, and enterprises. So Rob, I guess that the main question here really is, you have a very interesting title. So what does a chief toaster actually do?
So yeah, it's a much more fun way of saying all the boring things that the CEO actually has to juggle on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, I see. So this is a funnier way to tell the CEO title. But
Exactly.
I like chief toaster. Yeah. Rob, if you don't mind me asking, so how was life as you were growing up? What kind of interests had you when you were younger? Because a lot of the students would be maybe discovering skill sets, looking for experience. So if you can share a bit of that with us.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess when I was much younger, I was wanting to make money. Probably my primary driver was money making, and had started a few different ventures as a kid, everywhere from I don't know, I started up an art sort of business where I had a website selling art and selling friends sort of student artwork, which I thought was better than a Picasso. And so why should a Picasso be priceless? And so yeah, that's sort of like some of a example of what I did when I was younger. And then I met my now wife, actually, Rui. I don't think I've told you this before. I met my now wife at university, who was far more of a decent human being than I was. And so to impress her, I started to get a little bit more involved in social sort of enterprise, in community service, in some charitable projects at university. I went to Nottingham University, and I very quickly became totally converted to not just making money, but actually driving impact. So it started off to impress Nikki, and then I promise it evolved into a very authentic love for what I now do. But that's my shameless introduction as to how I became a social entrepreneur.
It's an amazing story, Rob. I'm hearing it first time, and I am impressed, as anyone would be in the audience, to know that in order to impress your future wife, you've decided to take the social enterprise route. Well, it happened, and
we remain madly in love with 3 children now, and she and I have both started different social enterprises and co-written a book about social enterprise, actually.
Fantastic. So, Rob, this is a question that I always like to ask the speakers that come on board or to stage. So what kind of entrepreneur do you think you are? Are you a thinker? Are you a maker? Are you a fixer? Are you a combination of the 3?
I think ultimately a fixer, but I think a combination of the 3 is always important. But for me, I get so motivated by seeing a problem and wanting to get super practical and rapid about solving that problem with what is often a very clear solution. And so, yeah, I'd say that's the sort of primary focus.
Maybe a question even to our audience to ask themselves if they see themselves as a thinker, a maker, or a fixer, or a combination of the 3. Or if there is anyone that you want to impress, make sure that you think about that for your future career. Rob, last question from me, and I'll leave with this question so we can kick off your conversation, telling us more about how you came about with Tostel. So what makes entrepreneurship so special? And tell us how this question led you to becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. I think ultimately it's that restless desire to scale and grow and build and fix challenges that exist. For me, heavily motivated by social and environmental problems that exist. but clearly, you can entrepreneur in any area. I would highly encourage anyone that is entrepreneuring to look at, pick up a newspaper, look at all the problems that exist. If you don't yet have an idea, just flick through the pages of a newspaper. There's this great social entrepreneur in South Africa, a guy called Charles Mazel, and he works with students, and he has this process called seeing the leaves. And for him, it's about the leaves of a newspaper, the pages of a newspaper. And you look at problem after problem after problem, because our media is so negative with how it portrays the world. But that's also an opportunity for an entrepreneur, because fixing and solving and addressing these challenges in society and communities and the world around us is so necessary. And in some areas, it's more urgent than ever. So in the area of climate change that Toast are addressing, we need to act with urgency and also with innovation and entrepreneurship, because the existing system is not working, and we must create new solutions.
Okay. Rob, I'm excited to know more about your journey as an entrepreneur and as the founder of Toastel. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you in the good hands of Rob. Rob, I'll be back on the other side of your lecture, and please, to our guests, use the Q&A button to ask questions away. We'll be picking those up at the end of the session. Enjoy the session, take notes, as I will be doing. And Rob, I'll see you on the other side.
Thanks, Rui. And yeah, great to meet everyone. Please do, use the questions. And we can keep it super informal at the end, and I'll address any questions that any of you have. So I'll sort of give you a little bit of an overview of how Toast started, where we've come from, where we're going, some of the opportunities, challenges, hurdles along the way. Certainly the world of creating your own ventures and running it day to day won't always be plain sailing. So I'm happy to share the good things and the not so good things as we've gone along. So I'm Rob, Chief Toaster at Toast. Co-founded the business around 6 years ago with a couple of others. I think that's probably the first sort of key is having co-founders. It can be quite a lonely role running a business, and so having people that you run it hand in hand with, share key decisions with, is critical. So just introducing that from the outset, that if you can persuade anyone to be sort of mad enough to join you in your ideas and ventures, do drag them kicking and screaming with you. The sort of Tristram, myself, Louisa were quite key to starting Toast, but also David and Julie. There are a few of us at the very beginning. Tristram had the idea. He recognized that beer was being brewed in Belgium by a small brewery there using surplus bread. And the biggest food waste that exists on the planet is surplus bread. Tristram was an expert in raising awareness about the issues of food waste. And so when he said to me, hey, Rob, let's start up a brewery, let's get wasted on waste, let's tackle this bread waste issue and create a beer, I was totally sold. And so Toast is basically a delicious craft beer trying to address the issue of food waste in society and save the world with beer. So we brew our beer using yesterday's bread from bakeries, surplus bread that would otherwise go to waste. We put about a slice of surplus bread into every can or pint of our beer that we make, and we're replacing the barley in the production process with that surplus bread. You're extracting the sugars, the carbohydrates from the bread, and when you add the yeast, so you're not using the yeast in the bread, you still have to add the yeast. It's the sugars, the carbohydrates, the wheat in the bread that you're accessing. You're able to upcycle the value of surplus to create really refreshing, delicious craft beer. So this all started about 6 years ago, just as a fun project. I don't think any of us thought it was ever going to become anything more than that. But it was a very fun project to be involved with. I was quite a keen home brewer at the time. Tristram, a food waste activist and advocate. He'd written the book on food waste, given the TED talk on food waste. I'd started up a few different social enterprises over the years, but was at a stage in my career where I was advising some others. So when he had the idea, my advice was, I should definitely run this, and so shamelessly poached myself to build it out. Louisa was an accountant by trade, was also had retrained to do marketing and communications, had worked in the Carbon Trust, and so also knew all about sort of carbon measurement, the environmental movement. And so we just had this kind of no-brainer of a team from the outset to get something going. First ever beer that we brewed was tried by a celebrity chef called Jamie Oliver, who in his heyday, I think it's probably still fair to say he's still fairly big, but I'd say he had his heyday a few years ago. So I don't know whether all of the students would know of Jamie, but he tried our first beer that we ever brewed. That instantly gave us some marketing exposure, some PR. It went on a TV show that he does called Friday Night Feast. So when we first launched what we thought was going to be a fun project, and he was profiling it like it was a fun project, the website crashed on day one because we had thousands of people wanting to order this beer and try it. Sold out of the first brew almost instantly, and realized, okay, maybe there's actually something here. And so I quite quickly quit my day job. Louisa dedicated more time to it. David and Julie came on board to help scale things up as well. David had a background as a sort of senior manager at a big retailer. Julie had multiple areas of experience and expertise, from retail through to sort of coffee shops and bars, and yeah, brought all of this expertise together, started to build our team, but on an absolute shoestring. So we had a little bit of money to get this thing started, but it was more about just building it out, a little bit of a kind of I guess sort of just evenings and weekends for the first 6 months or so. But yes, saw quite quickly that we had something there. How things have evolved. So I'll sort of rip through just to sort of explain where Toast is at now, but then start talking a little bit about how we got it there and some of the opportunities and challenges along the way. So where we're at now from those early scrappy days, still a very lean team. So there's 9 people in the business. We're a relatively small turnover business, a couple of £1 million, but growing rapidly at about sort of 60 to 80% year on year. So in a couple of years, we'll be hopefully a multi-million pound business. Our beers are sold in places like Waitrose, Co-op, Ocado, Getir. We're in restaurants like Oaxaca, hotels like Hilton. I can't say who, but we just got a listing on a big global airline, which will be very exciting. And so in a really exciting stage of growth and yeah, brewing more and more beer and tackling more and more bread waste. So we've brewed about 3 million slices of surplus bread so far. And yeah, brewing hundreds of thousands of new slices every month now that our size is as we are. We have open sourced everything that we do. We open sourced our recipe. That's been downloaded about 80,000 times so far. And we have inspired hundreds of other breweries to brew with surplus bread. What we want to do is try and transform the whole industry rather than Toast trying to do it alone. We hope, I guess we hoped, and we might still hope, that one day we'll be bigger than Heineken. I think in reality it's unlikely. And so we'd much rather change the whole industry and see Heineken and Carlsberg and others brewing with surplus bread rather than Toast going it alone. So that's been a key part of what we've done. And then also what will sound really daft as a commercial enterprise is that we donate, we pour 100% of our profits into charity. So either 1% of our revenue or 100% of our profits, whichever one is higher. And that for us is that we're also trying to provoke and prove that you can run business differently, you can grow, you can pay your staff. So we obviously pay ourselves, we don't volunteer our time. But instead of sharing profit at the end of the year, instead of having investors take dividends, we want to pour that profit into charities that are tackling food waste, redistributing food to those in need, and tackling some of the other systemic areas of the issue of food waste, the environmental movement, that Toast clearly can't address alone by brewing delicious beer. So we built the business on kind of 4 founding principles, and those founding principles guide a lot of the business decisions that we take. So first and foremost, and all in equal measure. So none of these necessarily outweigh the other. First and foremost, delicious, high quality beer. So you might be able to sell someone a beer on a good story, but they're not going to come back for a second and a third, and you're not going to grow your business unless it's a high quality product. Sounds simple, but it's so important that whatever you're doing, whichever area of industry you're choosing to entrepreneur in, and it does not need to be a new idea to entrepreneur. Many of the most successful businesses are just taking an existing concept and doing it better. So number one is just quality, quality, quality. Make sure that whatever you are doing, whatever you're producing is exceptional and stands out ahead of the competition. We've won lots of industry awards for our beer, regardless of what we're doing on the sustainability side. But then number 2, we're trying to eliminate bread waste. So that whole open sourcing of the issue, beer for thousands of years was brewed with surplus bread. The first ever beer recipe that we know of from thousands of years ago was brewed with surplus bread. We're trying to mainstream that into the broader system. And so that guides a lot of what we do. We've collaborated with breweries the size of Guinness, where we've brewed with surplus bread with Guinness, to Beavertown, to Brixton, to Adnams, to Northern Monk. We've brewed beers in South Africa, in Brazil, in the US, in Iceland, in the Netherlands, in Australia. Almost you name it, we have brewed beers in those countries in order to collaborate with other brewers and help build the movement. Third thing is donating our profits and trying to raise as much money as possible for the broader environmental movement. And then the fourth thing is trying to raise awareness about this issue of food waste, but in quite a fun and engaging way. So like Rui said at the beginning, one of our kind of mission statements is about throwing a better party. So if you want to change the world, you've got to throw a better party than those destroying it. We want to celebrate this amazing planet. We want to have fun. We want to be positive. We want to be progressive. It's a pretty dire narrative when you start talking about the actual issue that we're addressing with climate change. So we're choosing to try and address it in a very positive manner. And we want to educate and inform the fact that 44% of all bread that's produced in the UK is wasted, the fact that that's hundreds of thousands of tons every single year, the fact that a third of the food that we produce in the world goes to waste. That's over 1 billion tons every single year wasted. These are some of the facts and stats that we pepper throughout our communications. Some we put on pack, some we put in our broader marketing collateral. But I think it's important when building a business to have some of those founding principles. What are those principles that will guide the decisions that you make? So we've raised investment into the company, and we have investors that will never get dividends. They will only ever make money from Toast should we have a capital gain on their shares and have a larger, perhaps corporate partner come on board at some stage to take Toast to the next level. That's quite possible. But to guide the decisions around that trajectory, we have a golden share in the business that dictates those 4 principles. So if we were to ever sell any shares in the company, it must advance those 4 principles of Toast. And if there was to ever be a change of control in the company, if AB InBev, Carlsberg, Asahi, Heineken were to purchase Toast, they must abide by those 4 principles. We've locked that into the DNA of the company. And then talking of DNA, we are a certified B Corporation. So some of you will hopefully know about the B Corp movement. Some better known brands perhaps are people like Finisterre, Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's. There's a lot now of fantastic Tom Shoes, fantastic companies that are B Corps. It means we have, again, embedded within the DNA of our company, a focus on people, planet, as well as profit. And so every business decision that we make, we consider how we're treating the people. We focus on the culture of the organization. We focus on the planetary side, our supply chain, where we're procuring from, our carbon footprint, and then obviously from a profits perspective, how we're actually investing our money. And so the monetary side of things, obviously we're quite provocatively going for 100% of profits. Most B Corps might be doing 1%, 10% of profits, but that's still, you know, better than nothing. So yeah, that's been a really important part of our process as well, is certifying as a B Corporation and committing ourselves to that level of impact. And so where I guess some of the challenges are along the way, I mean, you could look at the brand and marketing side of things perhaps to start with. So we had quite a bit of success early on by just coming up with quite a good name, which sounds quite egocentric, but I think it is a good name. It's quite multi-purpose. It's short, it's snappy, it says what it is and it does, and raising a toast, and there's so much you can do about it. We came together with a bit of a team brainstorm. I remember Tristram really wanted to call it Companion, because companion has so many connotations of breaking bread and sort of sharing a meal with, compan. And so and companionship is essential value to Toast, building collaborations, partnerships, working with others. So companion ended up becoming a value within our value set. But as a name, it was a bit clever and sort of multi-layered, but would people get it? Toast, sharp, simple, and effective. But just having a name is one thing. Developing an entire brand narrative around it, and color palette and tone of voice, wow, have we had some discussions and challenges along the way. And I don't think we've got it right yet. It's ever evolving. And so that's just one thing to maybe be aware of, and to give yourself permission as well to evolve and develop. We started off with one design that evolved to another within a couple of years, that evolved to another a couple of years ago. We're only 6 years old. We've been through 3 designs for the look and feel so far. And I would imagine another one could come in a year or 2 ahead. Name never changing, tone of voice changing a little bit, but the color scheme and the look and feel changing. And that's partly because of the need to decide what is your USP. And for us, it's been difficult to decide when there's so many layers to it. We're trying to change the industry. We're donating money to charity. We're focusing on it being a great tasting beer. We're brewing it in an innovative way using surplus bread. So these different layers are quite hard to unpick. And when you focus on the key USP of the bread, it's not necessarily the most appealing for a mass consumer. So for someone that really gets upcycling, that gets the circular economy, that's loving what we're doing, 100%, they love that narrative. For anyone that isn't yet converted and in that space, it's a little bit of a kind of, oh, okay, so there's surplus bread in it. is that moldy bread? Has that bread come from the back of a bread bin? Which obviously no, it hasn't, but it could provoke that sort of thought process. There's also that sort of thought process of, is it more calorific? And again, no, but people associate bread as being calorific. Beer is already very calorific. We're replacing the barley in the bread that has those calories. So it's that was sort of one challenge, and we ended up leading with, and have had a lot of success, just focusing on the fact that it's a planet-saving product. It's an environmental mission-driven product. We focus on our authenticity. We're very open and transparent. We release an impact report, which is seen as quite an industry standard. Go to our website and have a look at that if you're interested in impact, because that really is, like I say, one that a lot of people look to as quite a beacon of what can be done with being super transparent about what you're doing. We're carbon neutral, so we're even net positive. So you buy a beer, drink a beer, you're actually doing more good for the planet than not. But also then overcoming some of the challenges of doing all of those things, but not having the budget to scream about it and shout about it. And you realize that there's a lot of businesses out there that will scream and shout and greenwash what they're doing that doesn't have any authenticity at all. They'll just shout the loudest, and then people take it at face value, but it could be total nonsense. And the regulation around how you market your impact is still playing catch up with the reality. Now that there's more and more impact driven businesses, more and more regulation is starting to happen to ensure that any claims made on pack are actually authenticated and regulated. I won't name them because I'll probably get into trouble, but there are some very big companies out there. Even in the world of beer, there's a very big craft beer company that shouts very loud about its impact. But it's total nonsense. And that's one of those sort of challenges that you come up against, as well as a little bit of a minnow in the space. Another area to maybe sort of touch upon a little bit is around culture. So as a high growth business, we have built a team very rapidly because of that growth, but made mistakes along the way. So before we were a B Corp, I would say we thought it was a given that we're a B Corp. Everything that we were doing, every way that we operated, we thought we ticked the boxes. But going through the B Corp process and realizing how we actually weren't as progressive or as thoughtful on our internal culture as we really should have been. We were growing rapidly. We're still growing rapidly. There was risk of people burning out because of the pace that we were operating and the expectations we were putting on ourselves as well as each other. As a relatively young team, most people in the business starting families at the same time and combining the pressures and priorities that should always be family first with a high growth business that everyone is super passionate about and not just there for the paycheck at the end of the month. If we were there to earn money, there's other places we could be that we could be far wealthier and creating a much easier paycheck for ourselves than with Toast. And so managing those priorities, and my responsibility as a leader to really be a gatekeeper and set the right tone and the right standard. I had a lot of learnings actually about, and still do, about how to get that right. And ultimately, a business is going to thrive, succeed, or fail and collapse on that internal culture and motivation of its people, of its staff team. And I think that's where you have to have a total focus and make sure there is total support. And obviously the last couple of years really challenging as to how you do that during a lockdown. And we've, when we weren't in lockdown and when we're not in lockdown, last week we went to the theatre together. Now that we can sort of get together again, we can do things and build that culture and build that rapport. Before lockdown, we would go and sort of, everything from paddle boarding on the Thames to doing litter picks to going camping, just ways that you can actually build a positive working environment and culture during working hours that then build that teamwork. And having to do some of that stuff during lockdown obviously had its fair share of challenges, but we tried our best. And I sort of fondly remember this thing where we had a sort of a marshmallows around the campfire moment online via Zoom, where we all had like a candle and a marshmallow, super naff, but we were all making s'mores at our desks, trying to build some kind of rapport and culture for each other, because it's so important. And I'd say that's just one thing to focus on, and it's not to be taken for granted, which I would have been guilty of at times in the past. Because at that high level of growth where you've got different priorities dragging you in lots of different directions, it's easy to miss what could be right in front of you, where a team member might be struggling and might not be operating at quite that same pace that you might be on that day or that week or that month. And so really important to focus on the mental health and the well-being and the support of an entire team. So I'd say those are kind of some of the kind of key things maybe to focus on from the outset, and maybe sort of open it up to some questions from Rui and those that are already there, and I can start fleshing it out even further.
Thank you, Rob. I was just taking notes as you were speaking, and I'm hearing it for the first time that the recipe is actually open sourced. I did not know. So
I was homebrewing the recipe on Saturday night with a couple of neighbors, actually. So I'd highly encourage anyone to get homebrewing. We don't export our beer anywhere in the world because of the environmental footprint of moving beer from the UK overseas. And ideally, we wouldn't ever even exist. I'd much rather people brew their beer at home than ever need to buy a consumer good. There's somewhat of a oxymoron or irony in creating a consumer goods product to overcome an issue like climate change, where consumerism is partly the issue. And so that irony is not lost on us. And so one thing we actively try and promote is to people to brew at home. So yeah, get brewing.
Rob, we need to find that recipe. We need to get together. Hopefully, when the pandemic comes to a halt, we should try to do something Central London. Rob, we just received loads of questions, and please keep the questions coming. I probably start with a question from Imeric, and this is a very interesting question. So, as a company founded from co-founders, and in your case, I think it was 4 people that you mentioned, how do you distribute the role of a leader amongst yourselves? Does anyone need to step up when necessary? Is this a fair balance, a flat structure? So, how did you do that?
Yeah, so we've tried in the past, part of that culture thing, actually, we've tried and failed to create a totally flat structure that has no hierarchy at all. And we look to these principles of just having a guided vision. So we've got our vision, we've got our mission statement. We have something called a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And the BHAG is our guiding star. It's to brew 1 billion slices of surplus bread. And we're only at 3 million. So we've got quite a long way to get to that BHAG. But a combination of the BHAG, the values of the business, those founding principles that I mentioned, we thought would be enough to then just give everyone a role description and just say, get on with it. You don't need management. Management's a waste of time. It just adds hierarchy. It's just, sort of bean counting. And we don't want to be in that business. We just want to get on and do it. And we realized that works for some people, but for others, it's terrifying. And it just leads to not just chaos, but it's really unhealthy for some people that don't thrive in that environment. So we've tried to create a little bit of both, as little hierarchy as possible, some clear delegation and designation of roles, but still have some hierarchy. So at the end of the day, if a decision needed to be taken that wasn't a consensus of, which we've never had. There's never been a decision that there wasn't consensus on. But if there ever was, I would ultimately take it. So if it came to it, then yes, I would take the key decision as the CEO of the company. But Louisa as COO, every key decision that's taken in the business is taken hand in hand. We consult each other multiple times a week, often multiple times a day. And it just super helps and healthy to have a constant dialogue. And we both bring very different perspectives, experience, life experience, to the decision making process. Tristram is not involved in an executive way day in, day out. He sits on our board of non-exec directors, and so is more involved on a strategic level every few months where key strategic decisions need to be made, but is there as a sounding board whenever necessary.
Slightly in a different direction, but equally important. And I think that I understand the point of this question. So Lucy is asking, how did you raise the funds needed for the brewing equipment and the premises? So I would probably spin this question a little bit and ask, if you are a young student, maybe with a little pocket money, how would you go about raising funds for your first prototype, for your first MVP, for your first ideation?
Yep. So for us, Tristram had a little bit of money to get things started. We were very fortunate there. So he had some access to some capital. So I couldn't authentically say, this is what you do if you have nothing, because we did have some access to capital to get things started. But what we didn't do was invest in our own facility from the outset. So rather than going all in and building your own brewery or whatever it is, production line, shop, whatever business venture you're looking at, rather than going all in, it's actually just about contracting out certain services and breaking it down in a piecemeal way. So we started in a brewery in Hackney Brewery, where they had some excess capacity. They weren't brewing 24/7. So we went to them to say, could we brew at your facility? We'll pay for the product that comes out of it. It will be Toast branded, and we'll treat it like a factory, effectively processing a product for us under contract. And we've scaled in a fairly similar way. We now sort of co-own a brewery in the southeast, but it's not entirely ours, and it's more of a timeshare, where for 3 days a week it's ours. We can do what we want there, but there's someone else brewing there on other days, and that again has worked as the perfect format to actually think about innovative models that work best for you, where we didn't have access to a lot of capital, just enough to get it started. And then since then, we've raised investment rounds in order to grow it and scale it. But I would say there's access to funds. Obviously, the very program, Rui, that you talked about in your introduction, there are so many signposts and pointers that will help you get access to a little bit of money to start with. £5,000, £10,000, more than enough to get you started on something. And then I'd say it's just all about creating your first invoice. This is maybe like silly patronizing advice, but it's key. It's just like getting your first invoice written up, getting that out the door, charging for your services, making sure you get paid. Some of those tangible things, it's just then you're kick-started.
Yeah, and great advice on using existing facilities and premises in order to create your first product or your first service. So, Rob, taking a bit from one of the last points that you alluded to, so we have a few questions here about investment. So, how did you go about convincing your investors to invest in this social venture? Did you approach them? Did they approach you? How did it work initially?
Yeah, so and then I see there's also some question about how you split the shares. And so, yes, incentivizing people from the outset without much pay, shares is a good way to do it. But don't necessarily carve up the business, certainly not 50% from the outset. And you have things called share options. So you might say to someone, I'm going to release 1,000 shares over the next 5 years that might represent 5% of the company. But you release it in tranches every year. So if they're with you for a year, then they get 200 shares. If they're with you for 5 years, they get 1,000 shares. But don't just give someone 5% of the company. Wait until you see whether it works out and start small. Don't, because you can always offer more later as you retrospectively think it through. So Tristram, his idea to begin with, he remains the biggest shareholder in the company. I'm the second biggest shareholder in the company, but because it was his idea, he put in the capital to get it started. It's entirely fair that he would remain the biggest shareholder to begin with. 6 years in, more shares have been released to me as the dynamic of it becomes clearer that I'm running the business day in, day out. Louisa running the business day in, day out, also another major shareholder in the company, and others who we brought in early who have stayed with it become bigger shareholders as well. So you can release that in parts, and you don't need to do that from the outset. Then in sort of incentivizing others to come on board as investors. I would say people invest in people rather than anything else. So it's presenting yourself in the right way to the right investors and ensuring that they back you and believe in you, and not necessarily coming up with the steepest hockey stick growth trajectory, because anyone that's going to put money into a business knows full well that the hockey stick won't ever happen, and that it looks great on paper and it looks great on a graph, but there's no reality in it. And you're not just going to triple your sales in the first year and grow at another 500% the next year. The fastest growing companies in the UK are growing at like sort of, so there's a tiny minority, literally a handful, maybe a few dozen companies that are growing in that hockey stick unicorn type way. It's not being negative. It's highly unlikely any of us on this call or conversation are going to start a company like that. The reality is, if you are successful, you will be growing a company at maybe 50 to 80% year on year. That is a fast pace of growth. And I think that's where there's an important reality check to understand in a growth trajectory what good looks like. So our company, our country is full of millions of entrepreneurs, millions of shopkeepers who are running very successful entrepreneurial businesses, but quite slow, steady growth, maybe 5-10% growth year on year. That's the majority of business. So when you're growing at maybe 50% and above, you're in or even 10% and above, you're in a very small club. Only a few percent of companies in the whole country will grow at that scale. And that's where I'd say it's more realistic to aim at, to strategize about, to benchmark against, rather than necessarily going for the sort of the crazy hockey stick, because that's realistic. And then you engage your investors with that reality in mind. You paint a picture of what is possible, but you're rooted in reality. And people will very quickly see through the bullshit. So if you are just, spouting nonsense, they're not going to back you. They're not going to believe you. I think people also want to see you doing something, grafting and coming up with something in reality rather than just a concept. It's very easy for some student at Stanford University to come up with an app that's going to change the world. I would say there's a reality in getting something started, something real, building something. If it is an app that's going to change the world, then certainly mock it up and get it started and club together with those that can build it and come up with your prototype. Otherwise, it's, they're two a penny, people with ideas. It's actually doing something.
So yeah, is the idea will have to resonate with reality in order to have a practical application. But thank you, Rob. So a question, actually two questions from Lisa, and I'm going to try to spin it the best way I can. So first, Lisa is asking if there was a period at the start when you were working in the team without a salary or a paycheck at the end, and piggyback on this question, another question, a follow-up, if you may. Would you be willing to share a little bit about the journey, how you first signed your first customer, your first deal? How long did it take? What marketing did you have to do? How did you manage to get it?
Yeah, so salary-wise, yes, started with nothing. and was very much a side hustle to begin with. I had another full-time job, and over the course of a 6 to 12 month transition, went from evenings and weekends side hustle to actually committing full-time to it. And even when I committed full-time, pay was very, very low compared to the full-time sort of slightly more sort of financially rewarding job that I was leaving. But that's very normal. And then even now, it's quite low. So again, founding a company, definitely don't think this is a get rich quick scheme. You start up a business, you'll possibly be one of the worst paid people in your company. You will bring on expertise around you who you will pay more, and that's happened on multiple occasions within Toast, where I've paid people more money than I'm paying myself, because you own, probably one of the biggest shareholding. I'm in an unusual position where I'm actually not the biggest shareholder in the company. Most of you would be the biggest shareholders in your company. And so, yeah, that sort of makes sense. And there's a reality to that. In terms of what's the next level of the question?
Let me go back to it. Just one second, Rob. So this is more about breaking the first deal.
So the first deal. So really kind of, so for us, I would say if I could do it all again, I'd do it differently. So we very much brokered the first deals, pounding the pavements, going coffee shop to bottle shop to bar to restaurant, up and down Hackney, sort of, just seeing what we could sell, and we did okay. And within a couple of years, we got our first big listing with Waitrose. But if I could do it all again, I'd really focus online. I would say we only really woke up to the internet during lockdown, and it just seems mad that you're like, oh yeah, so turns out Bezos was onto quite a good idea with Amazon like 20 years ago. It's mad that a company like us just did not really catch on to the fact that, of course, you can sell your product over the internet. So I feel just ridiculous and foolish even saying it, and it's like articulating it out loud. But that is the place for any modern day entrepreneur to start and build, because you then have a direct relationship with your customers. You've got all the data at your hands. You can represent yourselves exactly how you want. Whereas for us, we end up having to go through a middleman. So we're selling to a bar that's then selling to a consumer, and you're not actually able to portray the Toast brand experience as you might want it.
That might have been highlighted or underpinned by the fact that we had a pandemic, so more people were online longer, and the fact that maybe you managed to that way. Well, Toast managed that way to connect with the consumers more quickly. On that note, Karina is asking, how do you tackle a marketing strategy if you have very little budget? So, Rob, this could be an interesting question, because you mentioned that there has been a few iterations with the branding. You're trying to position yourself as you go along. As you just alluded, that recently you found that internet could be a great asset for Toast. So, if you had to give some feedback, or if you had to provide some feedback, some advice to someone that has almost zero marketing budget, what would that be?
Yep, I think probably stating the obvious. So one, it's leaning on some friends and family around you who might have expertise to offer. And that's what we've done a lot of. Been really lucky to have friends that went and got proper jobs, and they're sort of working in marketing or PR or design, and able to lend us some support evenings and weekends in exchange for some beers. And that sort of got us started. We have hardly spent anything on our marketing. We have been fortunate to receive a lot of PR, so a lot of media coverage that made up for the marketing spend. But it's then about deciding from the outset what your marketing spend is going to be. So one key thing, I should have covered it off already, is looking at your gross margin. That's going to be critical. So look at your cost of goods. What are your, which will be known as your COGS. So what are your cost of goods sold? And then difference between that and your revenue is going to be your gross margin. That gross margin then needs to cover all of your operating costs, like your rent, your rates, your staff, and various other things like marketing. And so most businesses, I'd say, will look at like a 30% gross margin on the whole. That's a typical gross margin that people operate to. Within that gross margin, you then might have an allocation that you think about your marketing budget. So we've typically spent somewhere between 5 and 10% of our total revenue on marketing. So we take £1 million, and then 50 to 100,000 pounds is instantly spent on marketing to make the next £1 million. And so that's kind of how to also think about it, is that even if you think you've got nothing, as soon as you've made your first £100, pour £5 to £10 back into marketing, and just make sure that you are constantly investing in that in order to grow. And obviously you can do it in fairly simple ways through social media, but again through traditional means like leafleting and pavement pounding, and getting your face and yourself in front of people, talking about it, spreading the word in quite traditional ways as well as online. Social media advertising does work. It is an effective way to build brands, and just looking at what your return on investment is, what's your cost to advertise versus your return on what you're actually making. And thinking about that customer acquisition cost. So it might cost you £5, £10 to convert a customer to buy your product, which might seem like it's a loss leader, but your total value from that might make it worth it, because their lifetime value as a customer might mean that they make 10 purchases. And so a lot of starting an online business that we haven't touched upon much is looking at the lifetime value of your customer. How much are they going to spend over the next 3 to 5 years? The cost of acquisition in the first instance. And that gives you a really decent ratio to think how much it is worth spending in order to get them on board. And suddenly spending £20 to get a customer might actually feel like it's worth it, but you need the capital up front in order to spend that £20 if you think their lifetime value is going to justify it.
Okay, thank you, Rob. A very interesting question here, and because we're approaching the hour, maybe time for 2 more questions. A question for Louiana. So, Rob, can you please clarify how you give back in charity terms in proportion to your revenue? And this person really loves the idea of doing business differently, and she would like to explore or understand how that is feasible.
Yeah, so there's concepts like 1% for the planet that I'd really recommend looking at, where you commit 1% of your revenue. So for us, if we're, making, like, if we sell £1 million worth of product, then we're at least going to be giving £10,000 to charity. But £10,000 for us doesn't feel like a lot. We'd much rather give 100% of our profits if it's going to be more than the 1% of the revenue. So if we're selling £1 million worth of product, hopefully we're making more like 50 to 60,000 pounds profit, let's say. But in a bad year, like we've had in the past with things like the pandemic, we might not make any profit. So we want to make sure we actually still have a commitment to give something to charity. So that's how we've structured it. But there's heaps of ways that you could look to structure it.
Okay, now time for the last question, and I think is a good way to wrap the session, Rob. Yep. What advice would you give to someone that needs to go out and start looking for the right co-founder or co-founders?
Yeah, I actually don't have an easy answer for it. I mean, Rui, I think that's a really great role for people like you to help to broker these connections, like not passing the buck, but I really do think there is a missing piece here where certainly I spent years until but it's almost like dating, isn't it? You need like a dating app. You kind of, for finding co-founders. We, by good fortune, I met with Tristram and we started talking about this, but I was so hungry to do my next thing. I just didn't have an idea, but I was hungry to do my next thing, having had a few ideas in the past. And so by good fortune, we came together. But I would say there's a real need and a role to actually, proactively bring people with ideas, with people who are hungry to just get going, because people will have so much talent, they just might not have the idea right now. And I think people are quite happy and quickly like eager to get over the ego that it wasn't their idea in the first place. Because as long as you're there from day one, you're a co-founder. You don't need to worry that it wasn't your idea.
Okay, yeah, and Rob, you actually refer something that the team looks to promote is this idea that we don't all have to be thinkers or makers or fixers. We just need to all be in the room in a setting. And for that reason, I urge some of our guests and attendees to join our workshops, the one-to-one sessions, because we can give you some pointers to help you to go in the right direction. What often I say to the students and to the city community is that look for meetup groups, look for specific interest groups of people that might share the same interest of you, something global, something not too niche, and then start meeting and greeting different people, start talking to different people and ask them what excites them about the world, about the 5 years ahead, what really worries them or preoccupies them on a daily basis, what would they would like to see the world becoming in 20 years time. So these are just some of the tips that we would normally give to the city community, but taking from your amazing story at Tostel and your colleagues, yeah, it's not so much who is the founder or who came up with the idea, is how different people have a different toolkit, a skill set that contributes to making the world or making the company great. So Rob, with this, I will leave you just to say thank you to you, thank you to everyone that asked a question, thank you to all the attendees. For those of you that want to join us next week, please be sure to visit cityventures.ac.uk. You have all the details for the upcoming events, one-to-one appointments, and soon we'll be uploading this presentation to YouTube as well, so you'll be able to replay it and watch it again. So once again, Rob, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I think shamelessly to say, if you want to buy some toast at toastale.com, use I know Rob as the discount code. That's quite a fun little discount code I can give out to give everyone a little bit of a discount so that you can try it. And
thank you, Rob.
yeah, so those in the UK get enjoying.
Fantastic. So if you didn't pick that up, so I know Rob, use that as a discount code on Tostel website. And yeah, let's get wasted on bread. I shouldn't be saying this, but yeah, Rob.
Drink responsibly.
Drink responsibly. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Thank you, Rob. Attendees, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much. Have a good week, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.